Welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. So we're jumping from the Israel-Hamas war back to Covid-19 again. I didn't cover the bits by Matt Hancock. There wasn't anything that came out that I don't think wasn't covered by the chief scientific advisors, the medical officers, Chris Whitty and I've forgotten his name now. The three that I already made about the COVID inquiry. So a lot of it was very similar. The idea that government didn't seem prepared, and there just wasn't anything of any difference that really came out of it. I know there was a hard grilling on, and everyone expected Matt Hancock and wanted to pin it on him, but he seemed to be suggesting the same as the scientific officers, that they were trying to warn, but they weren't being listened to. Now, whether that's true or not, who knows? But that was how it seemed to be portrayed. But now it's the big guy, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who a lot of people have been talking about being unequipped, unaware, and not making the right decisions. And of course, I know it is a very difficult, COVID-19, it was a once in a lifetime pandemic. Every 100 years they say they're meant to happen. Obviously the last big one was the Spanish flu, so-called, in 1918. This one came 100 years and 2019 onwards, and it's still here, killing people daily, even though it's not reported on. But yeah, it was a difficult thing, and it's easy to sort of be a person who doesn't like the system and the government to sort of say, oh look, blah blah blah, look how buffoonish she is, look, he failed and he let us all down, and but I suppose any person in this position, I may have been not saying that, I suspect worldwide, there's no country that's really going to come out good from this, because our expectations are so high and this is probably a false belief, that we believe that people in positions of power do care and do have the best knowledge and things. I don't think that's true. I think that the way that people get into politics is often about money and about power and possession and all those kinds of things, and are not, and as we can see from our daily life, this system that worldwide, in the different governments around the world, they're all very similar. There's often lots of scandals, there's often lots of corruption, there's things that don't go right, there's suffering, there's corruption, and all sorts of things. We know it doesn't work. So no one, I don't know, would have been able to stand up and make all the right decisions about something that hasn't happened in their lifetime, and so it's easy to just sort of attack. But on saying that, obviously Boris Johnson, in some of these things that we're hearing now, this bit, that's why I thought I had to record this, is he's talking about, it just shows up how ill-equipped our government, our system is with dealing with this, that it wasn't foreseen as something, even though there were statistics and numbers and what was happening in China was coming across, and we know there was this is probably the reason why it didn't catch on. There was they keep talking about swine flu and BSE, which did play a part in the UK, but there was another one with this nurse. She got her, I can't remember where it was in Africa somewhere. It's escaping me what it was. Was it Ebola? Something like that. And everyone thought, oh, it's going to come over here. I think she got it twice. She came back and she went back and she got it twice, but it didn't really spread over here. And often lots of people have always been worried and talked about that kind of Ebola becoming a pandemic. And I think 2 occasions, and it hasn't, and it stayed within Africa or wherever it was. So that's probably why, like the boy who cried wolf, you didn't expect it to come here. And that seems like the general feeling I'm getting from Mr. Johnson. But it's just the fact that they did have numbers, that 2% of the population could die, and they decided, let's have a meeting tomorrow. When Dominic Cummings is saying this could have spread around the world. Let's have a meeting tomorrow, don't worry about it, let's have a meeting tomorrow. Put it in your diary. That's what shows you that the people in these powerful positions around the world, and this is like I often say, it doesn't matter about the tags and all that stuff. Could be picked at any person. These people, they don't tend to be that caring of the amount of people that could die. Because we see, if people cared about people dying, we wouldn't be living in a world where we had money. We wouldn't be living in a world where we can't help each other. We have pharmaceutical companies that make a profit out of medicine. We wouldn't have people sleeping on the streets when we have all the free resources and energy, but we've tagged and possessed it, as I talk about a lot in these Pursuits of Truth. So that shows that people don't really care about people, because if they did, we wouldn't be living this system. We'd be living in a system where there's no money, where we all have everything that we need, and there's no reason for us not to have that, because we found ourselves on this place with every free thing here. We never had to pay God a price for all the stuff, or whoever created all this, even if it's an accident. Whoever did this, it was all free for us. The trees, the oxygen, the air, the silicon, all the stuff that we metal, all of it. We purpose it and make it into things, but the material was given to us freely. We didn't have to pay a price to no one for it. But we make each other pay a price for it. How stupid is that? So anyway, and then the worst bit is where Mr. Johnson is these exercises. They thought, this is bad. We needed to have a tabletop exercise, to prepare for it and what we're going to do and all that. He didn't attend. And I don't know what more is going to come out, but let's see. But it's, I don't know. I know it's easy to pick on Boris because he does say things and he does come across a bit buffoonish. Anyone who knows who's seen him on Have I Got News For You used to be a bit of a, people would laugh at the things he would say. And then he became Prime Minister. But then, we know around the world that very few world leaders will come out any better from this pandemic. And maybe it wasn't a possibility, like I said, but it doesn't look good, some of these things.
Hi, Imran Shafi, your private secretary of this meeting. You were in listening mode. There was a discussion about possible fatality numbers. But you expressed skepticism about those figures, the fatality numbers, and you noted, they say, that high fatality figures have been given for BSE, bovine spongiform encephalitis, and swine flu. Is that right, that you expressed skepticism about the possible number of deaths?
I don't remember that, but I do remember, I certainly remember the BSE scare, and I remember the immense destruction that did to the agricultural sector in this country, and the way that all turned out. I think it would be fair to say that I wanted to probe them on their forecasts and to try to understand the basis on which they were making them.
You've described how the Whitehall system, the process of government in Whitehall, failed to have a light bulb moment and appreciate the seriousness of the position. Would you accept that being informed about the possible fatality numbers but expressing skepticism and drawing a false analogy, as it turned out, with BSE, was a lost opportunity on your part to drive the system further forward with rather more urgency than appears to be the case?
I certainly would accept that my mindset, like the mindset of, I think, the overwhelming majority of the ministers and officials in Whitehall in that period, Jan to mid-Feb was not as alarmed as we should have been. That's definitely right.
236371, page 37. Mr. Cummings sends a text to what was called a Number 10 Action Group. It's dated the 6th of February, so it's early in February. We know that you were party to this WhatsApp group because your name appears at the bottom, Mr. Johnson. Dominic Cummings, we need a briefing on Corona tomorrow. Chief Scientist told me today it's probably out of control now and will sweep the world. Will be major comms exercise. Sir Edward Lister then refers to the Cobra meeting, which was clear that China is probably losing it, and once it reaches us, not if it reaches us, once it reaches us, it will not peak for 3 months. Dom is right, the comms is key, and then you say, yes, please, need to talk coronavirus comms at 9. Now, putting aside the issue of whether or not what you said about the mindset of government applied to Mr. Cummings, or the chief scientist who refer there to probably out of control now and will sweep world, why was there a focus, by way of the singular response to that information, on comms? Why didn't any of you say, well, if this virus is probably out of control now and will sweep the world, bearing in mind the fatality numbers, the IFR, the hospitalization rate, why did none of you say, we need to take steps now to deal with infection control, prevent the spread, alert the population, we have a major problem, not focusing on communications?
Because I think that it's your point about the infection rate, fatality rate, the consequences. I think that when you read that an Asiatic pandemic is about to sweep the world, you think you've heard it before, and that was the problem. And so I say we need to talk about it, but I think it would be fair to say that the scientific community within Whitehall at that stage was not telling us that I was not being informed that this was something that was going to require urgent and immediate action.
But you knew,
and I think that although you're right that we could see the mathematical implications of the reasonable worst case scenario, I think the problem was that we didn't think, and this was our mistake, we didn't think that the RWCS was very likely to happen. That was the problem.
We'll come to that.
So when I get told, anyway, forgive me.
But BSE did not have a 2% fatality rate. Swine flu did not have a 2% fatality rate. So when you say there was an institutional failure to realise the seriousness of the position because of prior Asiatic epidemics, or because of BSE or swine flu, the difference was, and it was known to government, was that COVID had a 2% fatality rate, and BSE and swine flu had not.
That is entirely correct, but I think the tragedy is that we were operating, as I said in my statement, on a fallacious inductive logic about previous reasonable worst case scenarios and this one, and this was the one where I'm afraid the worst predictions turned out to be, or almost the worst predictions turned out to be correct.
56137 is a cabinet meeting on the 6th of February, which you of course chaired. On page 6, so that the public can understand, Mr. Johnson, that this document, which is minutes of the whole cabinet meeting, has large parts redacted as being sensitive and irrelevant because, of course, cabinet dealt with many other issues other than just coronavirus. But on this page, page 6, cabinet turns to update on coronavirus. It's very serious. Official estimate was around 28,000 cases, but that's likely to be a significant underestimate. The virus didn't appear to have been contained in Wuhan. The mortality rate was only around 2%. There is a reference to a ministerial exercise on this page.
So what date is this, cabinet?
This is the 6th of February. There we are. There will be a tabletop exercise the following week. What was your understanding of that tabletop exercise? Did you attend it?
I didn't.
Did you have any role in that?
I didn't attend it. I'm sure my officials did.
All right. And then just 3 lines above it, the central point to make was that the government had a plan to deal with this illness, and this was guided by science. Did you ask in the course of that cabinet meeting, What, bluntly, is the plan?
I understood the plan to be, from what Matt had said and from the discussions I had had, that we would try to isolate, test, and trace people as they arrived. That was what I thought the plan was, and my impression was that we had a good testing system. But I don't. To answer your question directly, I can't be confident. I said in that meeting, what is the plan? But that is my understanding of what it was.
Let's just pause on that a second, yeah? This is the problem. He's a world leader in charge of all of us that we've elected, and we believe in the system, democracy, and we have these people because someone needs to look after all of us. There was a massive pandemic possibly coming. 2% of the UK population could die. And you don't ask, what is the plan? What does that say?
But that is my understanding of what it was.
A week later, on the 14th of February, Mr. Johnson, there's another cabinet meeting and another update, 56138. Page 1, we see the attendees. Page 6, the update on coronavirus. The Prime Minister said the government and the country needed to be ready for the coronavirus situation to get worse. The public messaging so far had struck the right balance between preparing the public for what might happen and not causing unnecessary alarm. Your focus there, Mr. Johnson, appears to be on messaging, on communications, on ensuring that the public are aware but they're not caused undue alarm by an overreaction. Where was the debate at your urging about infection control measures, the practicalities, the nuts and bolts of stopping the virus from spreading irrevocably throughout the United Kingdom now it had left China?
Well, I'm not certain that so first of all, on messaging, the messaging was incredibly important. Messaging in the end was the most important tool we had to deal with the virus. I don't think we should deprecate the importance of messaging. As for measures to tackle infection, spread of infection within the country, we've talked about borders and we've talked about test and trace. Borders didn't really offer a panacea. Test and trace, we were sadly not as well prepared as we should have been.
So the borders were never going to work. The test and trace couldn't work because it was only for a handful of cases. You've identified no other practical means at the disposal of government to prevent the spread of the virus. Why doesn't somebody say, we have a major problem here? Not only is it coming, but the two measures which you've just identified aren't going to work and will never work.
For the reason I've given you, which is that although we can see the RWCS and we're seeing these numbers, we are not yet believing, perhaps irrationally, but we're not yet believing that the RWCL or anything like it is going to happen. And that's fundamentally the problem.
Page 7, there's another reference to the government's plans. There were plans in place. Top of the page, concluding, the government's chief medical officer said that if the virus became widespread in the United Kingdom, there were plans in place. When the chief medical officer told you that, what did you make of it? Bearing in mind that if the virus was widespread, it would necessarily have extended beyond the limited test and trace system about which you were beginning to understand something, and the borders have obviously failed. What were the plans, did you think?
I think that he's referring there to testing and tracing, but plainly that was inadequate. At a certain stage later in the month, as I think I say in my statement, Chris did brief me about NPIs, about lockdowns and other measures.
Indeed. On page 8, you sum up the meeting, Mr. Johnson. You're grateful to the Secretary of State for Health. It was challenging to convince people. grateful to the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care and his department for their work, and in particular for getting the balance of communications right. There was potential for the virus to have a large impact on the UK's economy. Was it because of the mindset to which you have referred the inquiry that you didn't say there is potential for this virus, indeed a probability now that it will kill, rather than focusing on the economy?
Because I didn't say that because you use the word probability in the sense of, I suppose, of meaning an overwhelming likelihood. That was not what we thought, or not what I thought, certainly.
All right.
But I did think that we were now in a situation, almost certainly, where we were going to have to take a lot of measures to contain it that would be costly and difficult. So that's the point. And if you think about it, that was my BSc. You're notwithstanding your excellent point that it wasn't nearly as fatal as people had originally said. It costs an awful lot of money.
Cobra on the 18th of February was not a meeting that you were present at, but if we could just have up 56227. In broad outline, Mr. Johnson, and we can see this, I think, from page 7, the director of the Civil Contingency Secretariat says to Mr. Hancock, who chaired the meeting, paragraph 7, there was work to be done to create a clear plan of activity. It's not appropriate for me to ask you what was meant by that phrase.
Sorry, this is Matt speaking, is it?
No, that's the if it's paragraph 17 on page 7. The chair invited the director of the Civil Contingency Secretariat. This is her responding.
Yeah. This is Catherine Hammond.
Indeed. Were you aware, as Mr. Hancock has acknowledged and has told the inquiry, by this date, the 18th of February, that, quote, there was no rule book. The system had to build many parts of the response from scratch, and that there was no central government plan other than the old 2011 pan-flu strategy? Were you told that?
I was not told that, but that became apparent as the days went on, and clearly one of the things I hope in this inquiry is that we will have a much better system of planning for these types of events.
146563 is an email chain between your private secretary Imran Shafi, the government's chief scientific advisor, Sir Chris Whitty, and Catherine Hammond concerning the coronavirus in Italy. And to get your chronological bearings, on the 21st of February, so 3 days before, Mr. Johnson, 11 municipalities in Italy, you'll recall, had locked down the population of those municipalities. And also, I should say, that the Diamond Princess affair, that is to say, the explosive outbreak of the virus on that cruise ship, had become apparent, as had the figures of the number of people who showed no symptoms on that boat. But to turn to the document itself, your private secretary says it'd be good to see where we get to post-Sage tomorrow. At some point soon, I'd like to start exposing the Prime Minister to the potential decisions he might have to take in short order on this. At that moment, it's been fairly abstract with him, I think. Now, plainly, Mr. Johnson, you can't go digging around in other people's emails or in government systems to find out for yourself what's happening. You have to be reliant upon what you're told. What was your general state of information, the general level of knowledge at this date, now in the dog days of February?
Okay, so my memory now is that I think the scenes from Italy really rattled me, and it was, I thought, I remember seeing a note somewhere saying that the fatality rate in Italy was 8%. Because they had an elderly population. I thought, well, my God, we've got an elderly population. This is appalling, and this can't be. And I thought my instinct was this cannot possibly be right. This number, and And just so you know, I look at all this stuff in which we seem so oblivious with horror now. I mean, we should have twigged. We should collectively have twigged much sooner. I should have twigged. I think what Imran is trying to do here is to get the scientists to take me through the idea of the MPIs and what that would involve.
This is the 24th. There'd been a COBRA on the Tuesday before, the 18th of February. There wasn't a COBRA, in fact, again until the 26th of February. This was just on the cusp of half-term. There was no cabinet between Friday the 14th of February and Tuesday the 25th of February, but SAGE and NERVTAG continued to convene. Despite being, as you've said it yourself, seriously rattled by the news of Italy, did the tempo of work on coronavirus nevertheless dip during the half-term break that followed?
I noticed that you've been over that period in your previous interrogations in this inquiry, and I hope the inquiry is satisfied that actually there wasn't a long holiday that I took in that.
And you personally, well, let me ask you,
because I think that there was some misapprehension.
You carried on working because you returned to Downing.
For instance, on the 18th,
if you'll allow me to set out the picture, Mr. Johnson, it may make things a bit easier. You returned to Downing Street 3 times, I think, during that half-term break from Chevening, where you weren't at Chequers. You received a number of notes in your red box. You didn't, though, receive a daily update, I think, dealing with coronavirus expressly or exclusively until your return from the half-term break on Monday, the 24th of February. And the question to you is, in the box returns, the box notes that you did receive, what proportion focused on coronavirus?
Well, I can't tell you that. Because I can't remember. But I remember there were certainly conversations going on about COVID with my officials, and in that very period, I rang President Xi of China to offer the UK's condolences for what was happening in China, to discuss the origins of COVID and to compare notes on what was happening. I also, I think a couple of days later, I rang President Trump in America to discuss exactly the same thing. So it was despite what has previously been said to the inquiry by some of the evidence, there was a lot going on, and it really starts to mount in tempo around about the time that we get Catherine Hammond's note of the
on the 28th of February.
Yes.
So the question to you, Mr. Johnson, is this, and nobody is suggesting you put your feet up at Chevening during that week.
Apart from you, that is.
Well, what I'm suggesting to you is, by your very own reference to the fact that tempo increased after the half-term break, between the 14th of February, when Cabinet discussed the plans that would need to be drawn up, to the 25th of February, after half-term, relatively little overall was done in terms of responding to this immediate crisis. Was there?
I think that sorry, forgive me, Ms. Kidd, forgive me, I was referring to a conversation I happened to catch on the between you and a previous witness, in which I thought the impression was being given by somebody that I was relaxing during that period.
I think it was Mr. Cummings.
It may have been.
And not given by me, Mr. Johnson, but by the witness.
I take it back unreservedly, Ms. Keith, and I apologize. I was working throughout the period, and the tempo did increase, particularly during when we got when I saw the message from Catherine Hammond on, I think it was the 2nd of March, but I'm told it was earlier.
But there was a meeting on the Friday, the 28th of February, that you attended.
That's right. With
the CCS.
That's right. And what troubled me was the sheer number of potential fatalities under the RWCS, and this was just a horrifying figure, and I couldn't believe it. I've got to be honest with you. I thought this because what the paper also said was it may be like a bad flu pandemic, or it may be milder than that. And I thought, well, we have plenty of bad flu pandemics in the UK, and we also have, and if it's milder than that, then it won't be an exceptional thing at all. So why am I also being told that the RWCS is 520,000?
Well, that was, of course, a meeting on the 28th of February, but I want you, please, to answer the question about the tempo of work on coronavirus between the 14th of February and the 28th of February when that paper was produced to you. Would you accept that there was a lost opportunity on the part of government to react with sufficient speed and attention to the nature of this crisis in that 2-week period? For whatever reason, because of the mindset, because parts of government were away, it matters not. Overall, the government took its eye off the ball in that 2-week period by failing to act sufficiently speedily.
I think that there were clearly things that we could have done if we'd, and should have done, if we'd known and understood quite how fast it was spreading, but we didn't.
All right.
And that was the reality.
There's a COBRA on Wednesday the 26th of February, 56216, page 6. This is a crucial moment, although it's not, again, a COBRA that you were present at,
Oh my God.
Mr. Johnson, but it is a COBRA of the utmost seriousness, because on page 11, the chair, Mr. Hancock, said the reasonable worst-case planning assumptions looked close to becoming the reasonable planning assumptions as cases in Italy demonstrated the need for heightened alertness. Turning that into plain English, what Mr. Hancock was saying was that the government, which had hitherto been working on the basis of planning for a reasonable worst-case scenario, planning for the worst but hoping for a better outcome, had realized that the reality of the scenario identified by Sir Chris Whitty in January, the second scenario, was looking close to becoming the reality. That is to say, the reasonable worst-case scenario was indeed coming to pass. Not there quite yet, but it was looking close. Would you agree that that understanding was a crucial moment?
Sorry, what date is this?
This is the 26th of February. It's a COBRA you weren't present at, and it's in advance of the receipt by you of the civil contingencies paper.
It does look as though that meeting informed Catherine Hammond's, or helped to inform Catherine Hammond's paper, and perhaps was the reason why I got had the meeting I did. But I couldn't swear to that.
I haven't asked you that, in fact, but it may well be, as a matter of my lady, the material shows that the CCS were tasked to provide the paper for you before this meeting.
Okay.
But the question from this paragraph for you is, as the Prime Minister, were you told that the COBRA, which you had not shared, had been told that the reasonable worst-case scenario was looking close to becoming the reality?
I don't remember that. I don't remember that.
The CCS paper, 28th of February, is 182331. The first paragraph, Ms. Hammond says, COVID-19 looks increasingly likely to become a global pandemic, although this is not yet certain. It's the first sentence of this report. Did you ask Ms. Hammond, how can it not yet be certain when the virus has escaped China, there is sustained human-to-human transmission outside China, there are cases now in the United Kingdom, and we have no means of preventing its spread? Why is she saying it's not yet certain?
I think, I don't know the answer, why she's saying that. I think, formally speaking, it had not yet been declared a global pandemic, and I think it was up to Tedros Ghebreyesus at the WHO to do so, and maybe she's referring to that. But I read it as meaning it's not yet certain to be a major problem.
Paragraph 2, based on existing assumptions for severe pan flu outbreak, in a reasonable worst case scenario, about half of the UK's population would become ill and up to 520,000 people could die as a direct result of Covid-19. Just pausing there, note the reference to could die as opposed to would die once the virus has self-sustaining community transmission. The scientific advice is to use these numbers for planning. They're not a prediction. Did anybody at that meeting, or the meeting in which you had, and we'll come to the actual meeting itself in a moment, but did anybody at the meeting at which this paper was discussed ask Miss Hammond, why is the sole paper from the Civil Contingency Secretariat, the crisis management body in the heart of government, suggesting that these figures are not a prediction when, as you've just described, the information to COBRA on the 26th of February was saying the reasonable worst case planning assumption looks close to becoming reality?
I can't answer that question, but it's a very good question.
I can give you an idea of that question. The answer to that question is probably this. And even though Matt Hancock has been the one that's taken a lot of the flack for this, if what he's saying is true, and of course not only him, there are others, and this we see happen all over the place, is the people in charge didn't see it. But there were always, and there's always going to be this way, there were voices that saw it and said, this is going to happen, but they weren't listened to. This is what we see this all the time, that because people, you know, the higher up ones don't see it, it's only when loads of other people, someone with a suit comes or someone higher up says the same thing, suddenly then everyone listens. This is why, probably Matt Hancock, he said in that meeting, yes, it's going to happen, but the person who, the secretariat who wrote that document, I'm not sure what the background of that person is saying a different thing, because they're following what, you know, they don't have the understanding, the same understanding. And that's why they differ. But who was right? Well, in the end, Matt Hancock was right. Or those ones who said, yeah, or Dominic Cummings, or those ones who said that this is going to be really bad and we need to do something about it. And the Prime Minister's not even asking about plans, not even attending COBRA. The government goes on half term like school children. I don't even know why they do that. Anyone in the private world doesn't get 2 weeks, 6 weeks off because they're not school children. Why is it government? It shouldn't be like this. Government should be all the time, like all other workplaces. Why not? Because that's supposed to be the most important job. How can you be having 6 weeks, 2 weeks off? And in the middle of a pandemic, when Italy's already taken casualties in the Diamond Princess ship, and yeah, let's go on for a 2-week break. That should have been suspended, because you knew this was a possible pandemic.
2 paragraph 9. The report says we need to strike a balance between taking precautionary steps and overreacting. As cases spread, the risk of overreacting is reducing. We're now planning for a potential global pandemic that would inevitably spread to the UK, so it would, in this paragraph, inevitably spread. Did you assess, reading this report, Mr. Johnson, that the reference to overreaction was long past, and that, in fact, in the striking of that balance, there was now a real emergency and a need to take precautionary steps straight away?
I think that I found the paper very alarming, arresting. I remember going to talk to my officials about it, saying, which is it? A severe to mild flu pandemic or an RWCS of 520,000? Because I couldn't understand what I was being asked to anticipate.
So I've referred to the meeting. Your Private Secretary, Imran Shafi, refers at 146636 to the meeting. It's difficult to read his writing, but there is a reference to the PM asking, what's the strategy? There we are. Thank you. Prime Minister, what's the strategy? When are we going to take big decisions? Of what evidence? On what evidence? Of what evidence? And then you say biggest damage done by overreaction. So it looks from the face of this note that your sense that there was a real crisis, that you were extremely rattled, is prevalent in the first sentence. But in the second sentence, perhaps in reflection of the CCS report, you say the biggest damage is done by overreaction.
I think I'm leaving both possibilities open, because that's how it still struck me.
You know what it is, and I've seen this is another thing that happens all over the place, especially with leaders and things. Someone comes up with a problem. I've got a problem. And you always tell people, if there's a problem or something, you should come up with it. Someone comes up with a problem, there's a pandemic. It's going to kill 500,000 people. And it's gone to Italy, it's coming. He doesn't want to hear it. He still wants, and this is not just Boris Johnson, this is lots of leaders. They don't want this trouble, they don't want this problem. So it's easy just to say, well, it's not going to happen, let's not overplay it, let's see how it goes, rather than actually take the person who's coming up with you and telling you there's a problem, let's deal with it. This is what this is.
It still struck me. I think that in disasters such as this, the actions that government take inevitably also have costs, and I'm sure we're going to come on to this, but that's the balance you have to strike.
As the Prime Minister, instead of directing government to respond to the threat of a near existential crisis, you instead warned of the dangers of overreaction.
No, I say no. That's, well, forgive me. I say, when are we going to take some decisions, and on what evidence? Because I'm looking at a problem that's been presented to me. I need to know what the plan is going to be. I've told you that I don't like the look of the way it's going in Italy at all, and we need to do something. And that is the day, I think the 28th, when I remember that I'm not sure if Chris would confirm this, I remember having a long conversation with him at some stage around that date, when he takes me through MPI's, what we later refer to as lockdowns, and he tells me about the pros and cons, he gives a sketch of the behavioural fatigue argument, and he takes me through the issues. So I think what I'm saying is, well, if this is the problem, then when am I going to be given a menu of options about what we're going to do about this?
The readout from the meeting, 136750, shows that you called for a major ramp up of OGD, other government department activity on domestic preparedness.
And that was the least we could do.
Yes, if you just go over to I think the second page. Oh no, there we are, it's the top of the page, thank you, I missed it. We need a major ramp up of OGD activity on domestic preparedness. We should use the COBRA meeting to land this point with the Secretaries of State. The Prime Minister agreed with the approach to publish an action plan. That's the plan that was published on the 3rd of March, was it not? Contain, delay. He'll review the plan itself over the weekend. You read the draft plan over that weekend, did you not? The 29th and 30th of February.
The first plan, yeah.
28th of February and the 1st of March. And you agreed to the need for early emergency legislation, and then there's a debate about repatriation. Do you, with hindsight, and I emphasize hindsight, Mr. Johnson, accept that the level of seriousness may not have been sufficiently communicated in this direction from you? Do you say you did enough?
I think that I did what I could. I think that the problem is that actually, if you exclude borders and test and trace is not as good as it cracked up to be, and if you're told that we've got ample supplies of PPE, I was finding it hard to conceptualise exactly what we should be doing, except for the MPIs, and that was the only thing that I'd been given, and we had no plan for that. And I don't think the concept of lockdown, or even the word lockdown, had yet emerged.
Indeed not. There was a 25th of February SAGE meeting where non-pharmaceutical interventions were debated, but they didn't include lockdown. There was a debate about extreme social distancing in the beginning of March. Lockdown doesn't appear till later.
It doesn't.
But your answer, Mr. Johnson, is, I think the problem is that if you exclude borders and test and trace, is not as good as it's cracked out to be. And if you're told we've got ample supplies of PPE, I was finding it hard to conceptualize exactly what we should be doing. That debate, that realization on your part that there is no effective border control, the PPE may be deficient, that there is no effective test and trace or scaled up test and trace isolate contact system, is absent from all this material. That debate simply doesn't take place. There is no general realization the virus is coming. It's 2% fatality rate or 1% fatality rate, and we haven't got the measures in place to be able to deal with it. That debate doesn't take place.
And I think that's right. And I think it's basically for the same reason that I've given, which is that although people intellectually can see that the RWCS could happen, as Catherine Hammond puts it, they still don't think that it's very likely to happen. And that's the reality.
Now, in March, on the 2nd, you chaired your first Cobra. 56217. If we look at page 5, paragraph 2, we can see that you're told that contact tracing for the source of infection for the last 2 cases in the United Kingdom had not been successful. So just pausing there, even the limited test and trace system in the United Kingdom had failed to pick up what was still then only relatively few number of cases. It had not picked up the last 2, and that in both France and Germany there was now sustained community transmission. So in terms of infection spread, it may be thought, well, game over in terms of infection spread. The aim for the delay phase, if contained failed, was to delay the peak of infections, to reduce the peak and to minimize loss of life. Then in paragraph 3, the CMO said that interventions to delay the spread of the virus must not be implemented too early in order to ensure maximum effectiveness. There is material from SPY B, one of the SAGE subcommittees, on the 4th and 9th of March, also COBRA on the 4th of March and the 9th of March, which demonstrate that the Chief Medical Officer in particular said timing of implementation is crucial. Compliance or despondence is heavily dependent on timing. I'm going to use a well-known phrase, behavioral fatigue. Although it has no scientific genesis, you understand the phrase and its meaning. To what extent were your decisions, and we're now getting into the phase of which social distancing measures were starting to be contemplated, to what extent was your decision-making process influenced by this notion that intervention should not be imposed too early?
Well, it was the prevailing view for a long time. And it wasn't just the CMO who articulated the concept of behavioural fatigue. If you look at the many other meetings, or look at the press conference of the 12th of March, you can see that the CSA gives a very full description of what happens if you go in hard and early with a population that has no immunity, and then you release the measures, it bounces back. I think you've described it, the spring.
Will you forgive me if I pause you there, Mr. Johnson? I was asking you questions about this idea that the population mustn't have measures imposed too early because they will become tired of it.
Yes.
There is an issue about maximum effectiveness. I wasn't in fact asking you about the recoiled or uncoiled spring.
Sorry, but the two, forgive me, and you're quite right, but the two things are connected, because what the CSA went on to say on the 12th of March was that people get fed up and that you lose so if you have to keep, and we'll come to this I'm sure in the matter of the October, November lockdowns, you have to keep doing it. And so my anxiety was, in the absence of therapeutics and without a vaccination program, what would happen if we simply went into a hard lockdown early and then had no alternative but to come out. And so to answer your main question, it was an anxiety, a problem that was very prevalent during those early days.
This issue appears to have been raised with you at a relatively early stage on the 2nd of March. We must not implement too early in order to ensure maximum effectiveness. To what extent do you think it likely that you would have proceeded to implement measures earlier than you did had you not been told you mustn't go too early to ensure maximum effectiveness? What is the impact of this? Should the inquiry make of this debate? Is it important? Did it make a difference?
It's fundamental, and it goes to, because I'm afraid it's what happened. We have to be realistic about 2020, the whole year, that whole tragic year. We did lock down, but then it bounced back after we'd unlocked. And
so sorry, Mr. Johnson. May I bring you back?
Sorry.
It's the first week in March. Had you not been told, don't go too early because there's a limit to which the population will be able to bear the implementation of these measures, would you have gone earlier than you did, and by what time were you effectively forced to delay?
I don't think I can't say that I would have gone earlier, because I think I would have been guided by what advice I was getting about when to put MPIs in. Don't forget that this is a once-in-a-century event. We're doing things, we're enacting policy that has never been enacted in our lifetimes in this country. And to do it at the drop of a hat is very logistically difficult, but it was not something you rushed into.
But having been told by the CMO, be careful, don't go too early, because the population might not.
All right, I think that's enough now. I mean, obviously he wants him to say that, yeah, if he hadn't told me, I wouldn't have gone early. But that's not what happened, so it's not really a point, but I guess. But he came back to the point I said about the once in a century, and I don't know, it's very difficult to know. It's easy, like, if you don't like the system, or you don't like government, or you don't like Tories, or you don't like him personally, to easily sort of say, yeah, look at him, he failed. But I suppose the thing is, we're all human beings, to err is human, and like he says, it is a once in a century. But it does look like there were, but like I said, this happens across everywhere. There were people that were saying this needs to be urgently looked at, this is a major issue. And those people in charge often don't really want to look at that. They don't want to have to deal with these things and they hope that they will just go away. This is a concept that we see a lot of times when, look at, like, say, for example, in the celebrity world with Jimmy Savile, with Harvey Weinstein, with, all these different people, where people brought up cases, and to their bosses, to their leaders, and they didn't do anything about it. They wanted to, oh no, it can't be, just, let's just leave it, see what happens, nothing happens, fine, leave it, until, there's too many of them or the police get involved, and then suddenly, they're all saying, oh, I don't remember that. That's an example. There's loads of examples where this happens. So that's the major issue, that when people of credibility say something, they should be listened to, and that should be acted upon. But the real problem of this is, and why this didn't work, and why it wouldn't matter who was in charge, is because the system is the reason it didn't work. It's not actually to do with the people, it's the system. Our system, like he mentioned, everything was about communication and money, economy. They were the two things that came up before he started talking about deaths and pandemics and lockdowns. Because that's what our government, that's what our system is based on money, economy. If there was no money involved, we could have shut down, because this would have been the best way, and a lot of people said this at the beginning. The airport travel was the reason why it travelled, because it can't travel any other way. So in China, I know they did some lockdowns, but I suspect people were still flying into China, but they weren't flying out maybe, or I don't know exactly, I can't remember the exact timings. But of course, if you'd locked down Wuhan, China, the problem is people, you wouldn't have found it, people have already moved before you find it. If you lock down everywhere, or at least Europe and Italy, France, China, where these people moved from, then it wouldn't have taken place. It wouldn't have spread. Maybe it would have died out in that little area. And then people, I guess the thing is, it could have been years before we were allowed to unlock down. So maybe there isn't really a goal, a way of, a better way than the way that we found ourselves in. But definitely money played a big part. Our system played a big part in the failing and why so many people died. People are not going to look at that because they don't see that. They're going to look at, it's Boris Johnson, it's Matt Hancock, it's Chris Whitty. People saying this, that and the other is the reason why. No, it's not. It's the system. It's because we have to care about money, because we have to care about jobs, because we have to care about paying our bills and things. That's why lockdown was so long. Otherwise, if there was no money involved, if people just lived in houses and didn't have to pay for money, and there's no reason why they shouldn't have to do that, because the system, everything was found here freely. We put tags on it and priced it so that we have to do all this just to make our game of life. Then we could have done that. And it would have solved a lot of problems. A lot of the reasons why people died, like the care homes, the moving, the NHS, why do we have bad NHS? Because of money. We don't have enough money. These are constraints we put on ourselves so that we can compete with each other. But we're all human beings. And even in a pandemic, we still did the same thing. In a pandemic, we could have just frozen and said, let's just stop money. Let's all just say, this is pause on money, and we can do whatever we want, and we help each other out, and this money that, we can give fake money to each other and just pretend and just minus that out. But no one would have agreed to do that. The pharmaceutical companies, the governments wouldn't have agreed to do that because they all want money. They want to keep it. They don't care about people dying. Because if you cared about people dying, you would think, well, wait a minute, this is a major problem. I can't do this because I have to worry about the economy. I have to worry, now it's 4 billion or whatever it costs. And the cost of living crisis. This is inflicted upon us because of money. There is no cost of living crisis, really. It's a man-made thing because of money and because of the system and GDP and all, and borrowing and all, and wages and all that kind of thing. But actually, the food is still there, the electricity is still there, the gas is still there, the people to do it is all still there. It's just the money fluctuation between the cost and all that kind of stuff, the arbitrary stuff, the man-made construct stuff is changed. And that's what puts us in a cost of living crisis. People will die, people will lose their houses, people will be on the streets. And of course this happens, in poor countries around the world. That's why there's poor countries around the world. They're not poor. We often use, companies will use poor countries to outsource or to get their materials, to pay them less for their cobalt or their silicon or whatever material that they need. It's good for these rich countries to keep these countries are poor, because they can get these products cheaper and then make lots of money in their rich countries selling them to them. We know this all happens. This is the system. This is the system. Until we get rid of the system of money and a possession and dividing humanity, these things will always keep happening. And then we're going to keep blaming people when it's not actually people, because these people are born into the system and they follow this and they keep regurgitating it and keep it going. Why is no one ever going to say, well, wait a minute, the reason why it was so ineffective and the COVID killed so many people isn't really because of these world leaders. Yes, they made poor decisions maybe, or it was because it's the first time they've ever come across it, or they weren't equipped to do it, or they're inadequate, which is probably a lot of word to use in a lot of world leaders. It was really to do with the constraints of the system. The system makes it that we have to worry about money. The system, has all our infrastructure, our pharmaceuticals, the plans, all that stuff is all based on money, all based on employing people to do these things. But you've got less money, so you don't do it, so you don't have a plan. And schooling gets affected, and everything gets affected. So this is part of it. That's the real problem. The problem for all the world is money, the system, and the division of humanity. Take care, take it easy, God bless, and peace.